I will call the January 5th, 2010 meeting to order. Welcome everybody back for the new year. This is the work session for the commissioners, and this time we have the agenda that's before everyone. There are some changes, and those are, if you'll note on the back page, that's adding to consent F5 as well as supplemental information that we'll be receiving at this meeting as it relates to G2, the sheriff and jail staffing analysis, as well as the, right now, just a PDF spreadsheet of the commissioner's appointments for 2010. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda as is for the day? We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor say aye. All opposed. Motion carries. As it relates to the consent agenda, do we have a motion to place the consent agenda onto our regular meeting, which would be F1 through F5, and please note that F5 would be the addition that we just previously spoke about. Do we have a motion to put that on the consent agenda? We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed. Motion carries. So the first new business that we have is G1, which is found on page 77, which is the Parks Department request of the approval of a master plan for Rob Wallace Park. And I would call on Mrs. Londa Strong at this time and accompaniment.
Thank you. And what we have is the final master, or the recommended master plan for Rob Wallace Park. After the surveys and community meetings and input sessions that we had, W.K. Dixon has come up with the draft for you all, and I will give it to Tim Louder and Billy Royal. Oh, yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. I actually have a hard copy for each of you if you'd like it of the master plan. Take it with you and look at it. I believe you have a digital copy as well.
Are you going to use the easel? If you'll move the easel over closer to the laptop, that way we can. Perfect. Is it on the bottom?
If you see numbers, it's on.
Okay, it's on. Numbers. I talk about it for my hearing room anyway, so this is recording purposes only. Thank you. I am still out with W.K. Dixon Company, and I'm with Tommy Sal. And I just want to give you a brief presentation of what we've done and how this was accomplished, so that you'll be aware of what process we went through and what we did. And technology is a wonderful thing that works. All right. Obviously, y'all named it recently, Rob Wallace Park. We had to go back to and modify our touch it first, okay? But we changed it Rob Wallace Park. It is 190 acres located off Highway 601, and it's in the Midland area, and we're very fortunate to have such a nice site, such a large site to work very well here. And I think it will move in just a second. Hey, there goes double tap. Good job. All right. The conceptual master plan, we started out on August the 12th, so it's been a pretty good process. Since then, we have had quite a few meetings, as you can see. We had a couple site visits with our steering committee. That worked out very well. Everybody was pretty impressed with the site. We had a couple public input sessions. We also worked the county fair. Some of you came by the booth at the county fair was able to talk to us a little bit there. We got some input there. We also had an online website that people could go in and look at the site and make comments and fill out our forms so that they could tell us what they were interested in the park. Then we presented that back to the Midland Magic Festival with a very preliminary thing, got more feedback from that, and finally came up with the present to the commission here, which is today, January 5th. We thought we were going to do it last month, but we're January today. So right now we're scheduled to probably go to preliminary design after you approve the master plan starting in January, and it'll take us about 2 to 3 months to finalize the preliminary design to go to final design with whatever budget we finalize with. There we go. And as you can see, this is the overall master plan itself. Same thing we have behind me here, and you have a copy of it in your agenda, an electronic copy as well. But believe it or not, most everybody in this park wanted to be passive, which was very good because this site is very good for passive. The topography on this site is a lot of open territory, but rock is very close to the surface, so grading for ball fields probably was not very good for this type of site. And we have a lot of walking trails and those sort of things, amenities that were high priorities for everyone. So we were glad to see that. It worked out very, very well for the thing. We have the existing quarry site. This quarry is here. It's about a 75-foot deep quarry. It's about 12 acres. Nice body of water, but we have to work out that. That's going to be some issues to work out to make sure we can have people have access to that without actually having access to it, if you know what I mean. We'll get some pier systems. I say with the trail systems we have in here. Also, probably another fishing pond that's scheduled for a later phase of the park. Then we have some cabins and some bike trails. And then also had a couple active fields, which was already in the area that was graded for some football and soccer fields, which is about the only two types of fields that are missing right now in the Midland area that they could use more of. As far as the survey results, as you can see, hiking trails, mountain bike trails, playground, nature trails, piers and boardwalks, those rank the highest. So we were glad to see that. It worked out very well for the site. We couldn't work out better. I'm just glad it didn't work out the other way. Of course, you see football and soccer and stuff like that came a bit lower, but of course volleyball and stuff like that are pretty much a given, so they were lower receipts. Just some pictures of the site. Obviously, this is a quarry. Doesn't look like a quarry. Beautiful, beautiful site. Very clear water, very spring-fed water. I think it'd make a beautiful site for the park itself, especially for the use. Obviously, some of the open territory we see there now, it's it's a beautiful site. And here's a couple concepts here. Amphitheater was one thing that they talked about doing. That would be something we'd have next to the lake, would be some future phase. I think that would work out very, very well for everyone. Be a great place to have a venue there. The Nature Center would be something that was talked about. They'd like to have something in that area that could be a multi-purpose type building. I know you have a couple of them now in your existing parks that you rent out and generate some revenue for that, so I think that'll work out very well. Well, that's some concepts we have there with Barbara Walker had helped us with that on that process. And then, of course, bathhouses and stuff like that for the camping facilities. I know camping was a big high priority. We intend to have some type of cabin camping on the site. And I think that'll work out very well. You have some right now up at the park up here in, outside of Reimertown. And they keep them busy pretty much all the time. And of course, that's just concept of some of the cabins. As you can see, we just put together some photos just of the type of what we felt like was the theme of the park. And obviously it's a natural area. We want to remain a natural area, use a lot of rock, a lot of timber, that sort of thing to make sure it is that type of park. With a lot of walking trails, you'll see some things like this across. Got several creeks that run through the park, so I think it'd be a beautiful place for people to come and visit. This is actually a shot from the side here across a large berm that actually overlooks the existing quarry, so you can see that. We'll have to don't do a whole lot there, so we can probably make that work out pretty well with not a whole lot of work at all. And just the kiosk, we think those are very important, especially on a 190-acre site. People are going to come into it for the first time. They're going to say, where's everything at? Obviously, we're going to spread it out across the park. It's not going to be real heavily populated, so therefore they're going to need to have some kind of kiosk or some direction to tell them where they are. And then, of course, playgrounds are a biggie, but everybody said, if I have a playground, I want it covered. And so we're going to try to find ways to make sure those are covered so they can be used through all times of the year, especially in the hot summer times. And then, of course, this is a park we actually did in Clemson, South Carolina, but it's one that we use something very similar to have people to have access to the quarry, but not have access, if you know what I mean, because the quarry being 75 feet, there is some liability there. We want to make sure they can have access for fishing and sit over and enjoy the water, but not fall in the water. And then just a couple picnic shelters that would be scattered throughout the park itself. And then, knowing some of the feelings y'all have about swimming pools, obviously a water feature was something they talked about doing in next or second or third phase. We would look at doing a splash pad, which things to be very popular right now, and I think it will work out very well. That is about the third phase, I believe, we have for the phases of the park itself. And that's it. So I just want to run through them very quickly for you. You have all that information in your package. We have hard copies if you'd like to have a hard copy, but otherwise you should have the same presentation we have here as far as the master plan itself. And what we're asking for you to do is consider that, review your information, and at your commission meeting to approve this master plan. Because once this master plan is approved, we will use that plan then to submit for Part F grants and other sort of grants. We have to have an approved master plan in order to do so. Any questions?
When you're talking about the master plan, we went through concepts. To me, concepts are not master plans. What do you mean when you're asking us to approve the master plan, but you're talking to us about concepts?
The master plan is just the overall amenities that go on the site.
That's what you're talking about?
This is the master plan itself.
Okay.
It lists all the different amenities. It also lists them in phases, and the phases are broke down by cost on each phase. So in your master plan, you'll have a budget for each phase and a certain amenity on this site. This is the overall plan. This is 4 or 5 year plan. But we will have different phases right now based upon your budgetary availability. So whatever budget you have, we mastered that and tried to make sure it's tied to the master plan itself. So the master plan talks about all the amenities we want to have, breaks them down, and gives you the overall plan that you will try to accomplish.
So in voting for the master plan, it does not obligate us at all in regards to expenses of building a soccer field or putting in the mountain bikes or putting in cabins. It's just, this is the concept that we want to go with, and then what's the price tag, and then also how we're going to phase it in.
Yes, sir. That's what it gives you right now. The next phase of the park, which is, we have not started on that phase of the park, is the conceptual plan, if you will, or at least the preliminary plans. It gives you pretty much hard design, not quite to go to contract, but yet to design enough that we know we can price it really heavily and give you back exactly what each individual piece will cost. And then it'd be just a minor tweaking of that to be able to turn it into actual contract documents, should you bid the first phase.
Okay. And has Midland they're been apprised of what we've been doing, all three,
Yes.
either involvement or voicing or having a
All
voice?
of the above. We
Okay.
have, Kathy Kitts is on the steering committee, and she has taken it to their council on several occasions.
We recently met with the Business Association out there as well.
Okay.
Out there.
What were their comments, or what were their,
The Business Association, they were very excited about it. We went down a couple of weeks before Christmas to their lunch meeting, and, I don't know, maybe 30 folks there, something like that, and they were very excited and supportive of it, and we had no naysays whatsoever.
Still haven't had any.
Yeah.
Throughout the whole process.
We've had over 200 responses to our online survey, and that's been very good for us. We got some really good, and it was very consistent too, which I was very pleased to see.
any other questions? I was surprised that there was not more requests for baseball or softball fields down there.
We were too.
We were too.
We actually had the president of the Bethel Athletic Association sitting on the steering committee as well, and he is very devoted to baseball.
Mhm.
And he was quite surprised that there were fewer, and we told him he needed to rally his troops, but obviously that wasn't what shown.
Right. I mean, the biggest demand we saw for active sports was a football field. That was probably the highest priority for them as far as active is concerned. And then, of course, soccer, which could be used for both, but that was definitely the highest priority. They just don't have a football field in that part of the county.
Okay.
I was going to say, I was fortunate that Vonda came to my class, my travel and tourism class, and led them in park design. So we went through your document, which worked really well for high school students, talking about what they were interested in and everything else. So
Okay.
it was a good document. I've been over it quite a few times doing that as an exercise with the kids. But I do appreciate you coming out and having
Glad
that
to.
to share. I think that was a good thing to share
Mhm.
With the students.
I'm really glad you didn't use
In the
that as a
process.
bad example, not how to do it. but
That was
that's-
a very good example.
Okay, good.
Do we want to place this on the consent agenda or on business?
Put it on the consent.
Think new business, so people have a chance to hear about it.
More than, that's fine.
Second.
We have a motion placing on new business. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Louder, the presentation, I think, can come from Londa in 2 weeks, unless you would like to be here.
Live right down the road. I'll be
Okay.
here.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Next matter that we have is G2, which is the Sheriff's Department Sheriff and Jail Staffing Analysis Presentation. I'd call on Well, I don't see Captain Patterson. Nope. Come on up. Sheriff Riley, would you please introduce our guests and let us know more about the staffing analysis?
Yes, this is Brennan Associates, and we have Eric Jones and Todd Davis who'll be making that presentation.
Thank you. This is found on page 138, if you don't have it already. And we have some supplemental information, I believe.
Yes, we have hard copies. We appreciate this opportunity to address the board. In what we've done, we've actually have two separate staffing analyses. One is for the law enforcement side, and the other is for the new jail and detention. We'll go through the law enforcement side first, and Eric Jones with Brennan Consulting and Training will go over the law enforcement. I think you have a copy of that was included in your packet.
Is that what we have up here?
That's
Is that-
correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Todd. I would like to say and acknowledge the cooperation we received from Sheriff Riley and Sheriff Riley's staff as we had need to interact with numbers of his personnel and request an awful lot of documents from those folks. They were very accommodating and provided us with all the information that we requested. And again, we appreciate that very much. We also had some very good input from other folks outside the office of the sheriff concerning this law enforcement study. And again, let me reiterate that the piece that I'm presenting to you, which you were provided with previously, concerns the law enforcement staffing. The approach to this staffing study was through numerous interviews with staff folks and some folks outside the sheriff's office, a review and study of several years of documentation as far as activity for calls of service, response times, and the interaction that we received from the deputies as to their perception of how they were able to do their job and with what efficiency. We took all these things, used a lot of comparisons from some other agencies, took our personal knowledge. I'm a resident of Cabarrus County, and I've had the good fortune to know quite a bit about law enforcement in this county. So I was able to take that experience and knowledge to help drive this. We studied the individual components of the sheriff's office with exception to the detention center, the executive branch, as well as the operations and administrative divisions. In looking at all the functions, and you'll see from the document that we compiled and prepared, there was a pretty in-depth description given of the activities that take place by these. We noted that there's an awful lot of dedication involved on the part of the employees with the Office of the Sheriff and those folks that work for Cabarrus County to work hard with limited resources sometimes and the area of manpower to get things done. And that appears to have been a trend going back for a number of years. Very conservative in the approach of needs of manpower. But we identified as we went through these different divisions areas that we felt that there was need for additional staffing to meet the responsible call times, to do the investigations, to do the constitutional duties that are required by the Constitution of the Office of the Sheriff in areas particular to the courts, civil process, those areas that sometimes people do not recognize to the level that they should. In fact, that the civil division, for instance, is responsible for generating a significant amount of money back to the county. Without their resources and abilities to work the tax warrants and things of that nature, that impacts on some of the revenue that can actually come back to the county. We also noted that the backbone of the sheriff's office is that of the patrol division. This patrol division traditionally over the years has not grown very much at all. Our demographics, which was the first part of this report, gave you a little background, additional background, especially for someone who was picking up a report and looking at this for the first time, a little bit about the county and how the county has grown. And of course, we know that Cabarrus County has had significant growth in the last decade in particular. And to that end, a lot of the duties have continued, and the area of responsibility has been handled by, for the most part, pretty stagnant number of individuals in those areas. And remember, we're talking about the law enforcement side. So you all have the ability to read. I don't think you want me to take up a lot of time going through here page by page. I'm going to kind of cut to the chase. We'll be glad to answer at any time any additional questions or provide additional information concerning this study and our wherewithal of coming to these conclusions. But you'll notice as we went through, there's definite observations over each area, and these observations in some cases generate the need for recommendations of positions. And those positions are brought to conclusion at the end of the document with a total conclusion of 21 additional positions. And these positions are broken down by the different divisions within the sheriff's office, the executive, administrative support services, those divisions, and explanation of the type of position and reasoning for that. Now, our review and study helped identify these areas and these needs as we perceived them. This did not set in motion a plan, because that is something that's a responsibility of the Office of the Sheriff, and of course, you, the Board of Commissioners, to establish a plan of action if you so deem necessary to meet these objectives that we set forth. Because there is a critical issue of funding that becomes available, necessary to be considered. So we did not put it into a format. There's leeway on behalf of the sheriff's office and the commissioners to take this information and massage it, digest it, and determine in what fashion or mode that you would try to move forward to satisfy some of these recommendations or all of these recommendations as you would see fit and as the county is able to move forward and financially be able to accomplish these. So there ends my report. Like I say, you have the information. We'll be glad to answer questions. And this, again, deals with strictly the law enforcement side of the sheriff's operation. And Mr. Davis will discuss and present concerning the detention services.
One thing on the law enforcement, you'll see in the actual report, it talks about a lot of the different job functions and responsibilities. A lot of times people don't realize exactly what duties have to carry on in law enforcement. This report, we looked at everything from your animal control to the lake patrols to every different district patrol, every investigative division, your court security, and the entire nucleus of the law enforcement side. I know oftentimes you talk with general public about things that happen in the sheriff's office, and they go, "Oh, we didn't know they did that," or "That's kind of new to me." Well, unless you're actually in that profession and you do that every day, people just assume that somebody's doing that, but don't really know who. I think if you get in and to read this report, as we broke it down into different sections, you'll see all the different tasks that has to happen. And we base our recommendations on available workload and what duties and responsibilities each division of the sheriff's office has to deal with. So like Eric said, we spent numerous hours riding in cars with deputies, interviewing people, looking at their workload and seeing what their actual calls for service were, how much, what was having to be kind of spread out a little bit. We found out that a lot of people are having to wear a lot of different hats, you know, and it's, in society today, that's the way it is, you know, especially in the economic times that we have. But I think if you look at the way we broke this down into different sections, you'll see it, and I'll be shocked if you don't find that, hey, I didn't know that we did that there. I didn't know that we actually provided that. I didn't know they had to do that duty. That's typically what we find out when doing these types of reports. So if you have any questions on the law enforcement side, we'll be glad to field those now.
Does anybody have any questions right now? While y'all are looking at it, I can ask a couple. Tell me about you got the Lake Patrol unit. What, the lakes that I'm aware of that we have are not accessible, or not to be used by the public through, I don't know if that's federal mandate or state mandate or local, but.
The lakes that you have that the sheriff's office is involved with, as far as the deputy who's assigned to work through WASA, I believe it is, on contract, to patrol those lakes to make sure that they're not entered by the public. This is drinking water sources. These lakes are located, in most cases, as I found in riding with those folks, they're off the kind of beaten track. You might ride by Lake Howe and see it right there, but to gain access to the different parts of the lake is through private property, while there's easements and whatnot. We saw that as a function that was being satisfied without the need for any additional personnel. The deputy assigned is able to do all those functions, and if it would get to the point that there would need to be additional law enforcement services provided to that area, that would be something that would actually need to come from WASA to say, you know, we need to fund an additional position here that would take care of making sure there's not trespassers, people on the lake, things of that nature.
When you were talking about making comparisons to other law enforcement agencies, were they other sheriff's?
Sheriff's agencies.
Okay, they're all sheriff's
Yes,
agencies.
yes, sir, sheriff's agencies.
And if you're not privy to tell me who you made the comparisons to, how are you making the comparisons? In other words, were you comparing Cabarrus to Mecklenburg or Cabarrus to
like-sized counties in population.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, population is always a tricky number to use, because if you use Jacksonville, Florida, they certainly would have a large population, but very small as it relates to the county, because it's all in the, for the most part, it's all in the city. So how do you make that delineation, I should say?
Well, as we look at these, you know, you could use and say, well, you need X number of deputies per 1,000 people or whatnot. Instead of using an approach like that, we actually get into looking at the county area. When we talk about patrol, the area that is out in the county, looking at that, not in relation to the corporate limits of Kannapolis or Concord or Harrisburg. Those areas that's the responsibility for law enforcement by the sheriff's office. However, within the corporate limits, there's responsibilities that the sheriff has to provide services such as animal control, the civil process, all the civil processes that are served in Cabarrus County, whether they're in the city, out in the county, are served by the sheriff, because that's the responsibility of the sheriff. The areas such as the contract law enforcement with a couple of the municipalities, where the municipality does not operate a police department, but has opted instead to contract with the sheriff's office to provide that law enforcement. That law enforcement is being provided at the level basically that the municipality wants that law enforcement funded to, because if they want additional positions, the sheriff has his positions that are normally assigned, and traditionally that's all that's assigned. And if they want additional, then they decide to fund those positions and put them under the control of the sheriff to provide those services.
One other comment that you made was that the patrol division has not grown. However, there's been significant growth within the county. Would you explain that in the context of cities are growing, so the county's shrinking? That's the that's the prevailing thought. And I know I've gotten the answer several times.
Well,
But
while
I
the
want to
ci-
make certain that everybody understands what
Yeah.
you mean by that
while
statement.
the cities are growing, the county area may seem to be shrinking in responsibility, but for the area patrol, there may be some shrinkage, but in the size of the patrol districts and with growth, the number of personnel assigned to work that district, while it may have somewhat smaller connotations due to expansion of municipal boundaries, there's still the matter of the distance involved to respond to calls for service from one side of that district to the other side. And as the growth is taking place, and we certainly notice around, traffic has become a big problem. So to be able to get from one side of a zone to the other side of the zone to answer a call, while a few years ago, that was something could be accomplished in a rather short time frame. Now, due to traffic congestion, especially several times during the day, it takes much longer to be able to do that. There's not necessarily agreements in place where at the drop of a hat, someone from a municipality will not just normally go out and answer a call into the county. So we try and take into consideration keeping the proper number of staff available to make sure there's people there to service those calls in a timely manner, considering the fact that you have X number of personnel assigned to that division. But on any given day, how many people are going to be able or available to work based on mandated training needs, annual leave that's granted to employees, and also leave that may be due to sickness or workman's compensation, things of that nature that will take away a position or a person away from that. There still has to be people available to meet those needs.
And one thing, kind of maybe to elaborate a little bit more on your question about, as the cities have grown, the amount of that zone for the county has gotten smaller. The workload in that area has not decreased. Even though you took X amount of acres away and now that's in the city, the still calls for service and the need for that in that area has not. So even though you've taken it away, there's still calls for service. And that's kind of where we based our need for personnel, was based on the workload in those zones.
Any other questions? Well, the way I look at it is, there's a lot of things to look at and to digest as it relates to the law enforcement aspect. And when I say law enforcement, I'm not talking about the sheriff's, I'm not talking about the jail. So what you presented today, there's a lot to look at. And I think I certainly would have more questions, more of philosophy, and understand it better, Sheriff Riley, is to say, why are we doing it this way, or what's the importance of doing it that way? And I don't think this is the right forum to do that right now, but I do think that whether, I don't know if it's the retreat or a different meeting, but after we get a chance to look through all of these, then to kind of ask, well, what's the philosophy behind A? And you can help us understand that this is why it's important, or there's different ways to look at it, different schools of thought.
I want to mention also that the way this whole thing came about is if you remember last budget, I had some candid discussion about lack of staffing over the last couple of years, and in the sense that if I came to you and felt like there was a need for 8 officers in that particular year and we settled for 4, and I'm going back 9 budgets ago, next year we may have the same need, but we never recovered the 4 that we didn't get the year before, yet we're talking about 8 more in the next budget and we're cutting it by 4, and that compilation over time is where we're at today. And again, I think that the board has been very, very good along the 9 years that I've been involved with the budget and working together and getting as much for as little through some bad budget times. And now, ironically, we're in the worst economic times than I've probably seen in my lifetime, much less through the last 9 budgets. But I was very scared last year that there's no doubt in my mind over the last 2 or 3 years, we've asked our law enforcement officers in this county at the sheriff's office to do more things than most agencies are asking their law enforcement officers to do. And we're to a critical point to where there's significant things that have to change now. It's not a matter of continuing to pile things on other officers and ask them to do more responsibilities than they're capable of doing when a liability is stricken. And that's where I think we're at in some of these areas. And I think that's what led to this is some of the discussions with the board, and the board said, hey, let's get an outside source to come in, take a look at this, and let's see from a third party if what the sheriff is saying is accurate. And I was 100% behind that, because I've watched this not just for the last 9 years, but I've watched it for the last 20 years of being associated with the sheriff's office. And I've seen the bleeding, I've seen the problems, and to be quite honest with you, I think a lot of the questions that you're asking, if you'll go back and look in the last couple of budgets, some of them you were involved in, some of them you may not have been involved in, that information's there. Population growth in those areas we've discussed many a times about, especially patrol division, that you can't just look at size, and you can't just look at the fact that annexations are taking place, because I can show you counties that have 700 and 800 square miles of property, but they only serve X amount of citizens, and they require half of the staffing that we have. The reality is you have to look at a bunch of dynamics. You have to look at not only the certain needs in your community, such as we have special dynamics here that require different things, such as an airport and Lowe's Motor Speedway and all these other things. Whether they're in the city or not, it still affects all of the services that are provided here. The other thing to look at, and I think that a lot of stuff's in those prior budgets, is that even though miles are being annexed from time to time, we're talking about small amount of miles. Maybe 10,000 people at a time may come in, but there are a number of people still moving in the county, new members that are moving into the county. So the growth out in the county would probably alarm you too, to see that the unincorporated areas are continuing to grow with a lot of that. But I think some of the main things to look at is response times. Look at how, and again, we can do a lot of this at a different time and talk about some of the theories and functions. But I just wanted you to know that this whole consulting thing, though I know these individuals, they've spent a lot of time at the agency over the last, 4 or 5 months. Most of it has been coming in, using the facility to talk to our people. We've had very limited discussion at all. And really just last week was I presented with some of these numbers. And ironically, on the law enforcement side, it's almost exactly what I have envisioned for the last 3 or 4 years. Maybe a position or two that we'll discuss at some point. I know that's not critical at this time, but I have provided Kalisha with a preliminary 3-year plan to meet some of these needs. And again, some work can be done with some of those, but I think that it's right in line with some of the critical points that have to be addressed in the near future. And this was all brought on by that compilation of deficit over the last 9 years, and not necessarily something that just came out of the blue this year.
Well, I mean, I certainly think that it's understanding more of the theory and the application would help us better understand what information we have here. Because it's easy enough for me to say, well, what do you need a lake patrol unit for? You go out there and look and see if anybody's on the lake. If somebody's on the lake, then you get rid of them.
Well,
and that's the simple answer, but or question. But I'm certain there's much more complex, because if I'm on 73 and I'm looking out, if they're on the other side, how do I get to them? How do I prevent that from taking place? So that's where I'm saying is,
for that particular, and I know you asked that particular question, for that particular incident, you have to have, for the level of watershed that we provide with drinking water, there has to be 24-hour of services to provide to that. And we have, dedicated a person and a half to do that, because, again, one person can't do it. He can't work 24/7, 365. So for the last, 10 or 12 years, ever since that became a watershed for us, we have dedicated a person and a half to those services to meet that mandate, and it's covered under WASAC.
okay, well, I think that's what I believe there's a lot of questions that we may have that go more to theory and a better understanding about how your office is running and the importance of whatever animal control, DARE, communications, you name it, that whatever you have on the list. For the typical public, civil serving subpoenas and serving summons is an unknown. But for someone in the legal profession understands the importance of it and why it helps to be able to do it that way. So I think that I don't believe this is the true format to really drill down to a lot of this stuff, but I do think that we need to have a sit-down and get a better understanding, and whether it's just with you, Sheriff, or with others in your office. I mean, I think once we have a chance to look at it, then we can go from there. Commissioner Poole.
I was gonna say, it was a good read. I will tell you that, I mean, I read the whole thing. I was curious what all was in there, and, there were a lot of that just from, life, I guess. There were a lot of things that I understood as far as, you know, what's in the document. But I agree with you, there's some areas that I don't have complete, handle on. I don't know if the retreat is the time to talk about it, if that's,
Yeah.
because I don't know what all we're gonna do, you know, at the retreat per se. But I do think there should be a time, prior to the budget conversations, somehow, that we can talk about this in greater detail. Obviously, this would be a huge impact, at any time, and we all know what the economics are right now. What's not in here is, there are a number of comments made about overtime. And so if you're paying overtime, if you stop paying overtime, then those funds are then available to cover some of the positions. So I don't know exactly where that piece comes into it, but as far as how my brain works, that was the part that I was looking for, at some point to be able to decide, there's, you know, administrative positions, support services, the operations division, how it's split out, you know, where are those overtime dollars being spent? And if you're spending some, you know, X number of dollars, does that equate to 1 or 2 positions? That's not really a budget impact per se. If you're already budgeting for overtime and planning to spend that money, then it would make sense to shift it in that regard. You wouldn't want to shift it and then still be doing overtime, though. I mean, you have to look at it realistically and make sure, you know, exactly where those dollars are coming from and how they would be used the best. But it is an interesting read, and for the people that watch this on cable, they can go, anybody can go online to our website, and under the commissioner's table, and you can go into the agenda and pull it up and read it yourself, because there's a lot of interesting information in there. I don't think that anybody would doubt everything that the Sheriff's Department is responsible for once they go through and read that. So I want to say thank you for the information, and I think it's presented very well for us at least to get started on the discussion that we need to have. So,
You know, one drawback to the retreat is I think it's important for the general public to know what we're going through and the questions, because it's an educational issue. Like you said, is a lot of functions of the Sheriff's Department people just don't know about. What I would like to think, and what we may, if it's acceptable to everybody, is maybe have it at the end of one of our work sessions. That way, Sheriff, you can get your work done, and, you know, we start up at 5:30 or 5 or so, and say we start it there, and we start talking about it then. And, you know, if we shoot for our either work session in March or April at the latest, then that would give us an opportunity to have that discussion. So.
One suggestion that I might have is that you consider it in the context, or that it's more valuable to consider it also within the financial implications that it bears, and they are considerable. As we open the detention center, we know that there is going to be a considerable impact on the budget. And beyond that, at this point, there probably is room for little else. So maybe it would be helpful to talk about this after our staff has worked with the sheriff in formulating some funding plans, because as you heard the sheriff say that he was looking at a 3-year period for I guess the non-detention part of it. And so we're going to need to work with his staff and kind of figure out how this might work, and that way you know what the real implications of it are in terms of budgetary requirements, and that might make the discussion more meaningful.
It's also probably premature to even ask, but in the current atmosphere nationally with the security issues, are you beginning to hear any rumbling or what's your feeling about unfunded mandates coming down the pike for us in regards to security?
There's several things in the air. I mean, again, the poker thing's poking its nose back out.
What was that? I'm sorry?
The internet cafes have resurfaced, and again, those were sprung on the sheriff several years back, just unmandated legislative move that was made, and then they were taken away, and now the internet cafes are wide open again to do certain things under certain contexts. So that's something that's still out there. Sex offender registration has been updated and updated and updated, and requirements continue to be implemented to require different things. And again, you'll see as part of this was the need in the future for more sex offender registry. Ironically, we're just coming off the backside of a real violent crime that occurred in this county of a sex offender that was registered here. And that just goes to show you that how important it is to make sure these individuals are compliant and attended to. And who knows what what'll come down the road with those recommendations. Again, in this report, one of the things that was addressed that I spent some time is that the need for us to take a look at all the different technologies that are coming on, and having individuals that are keeping your hazard plans and your tactical plans in place. Having a person that's dedicated to doing that, even not just at a homeland level, but even at a larger scale level, is very important. So I think that as we move forward, that you may see some mandates come down from those areas, but who knows? I don't know at this point that there's anything very visible that would cross us up.
Any other questions as it relates to the law enforcement or the sheriff staffing analysis? Okay, we want to move into the jail staffing.
The jail staffing section, we followed the Department of Justice, National Institute of Corrections format on determining jail staffing. There's a couple of things to start with. One, probably the most common mistake that people make when they start looking at how to staff a jail is they say, well, how many inmates do we have, and how many officers should we have per that number of inmates? Well, if you were doing it in a warehouse style of just simply warehousing inmates all in one room, then you could do that. Unfortunately, our standards by state and federal guidelines, you have to segregate and you have to separate different classifications of inmates in different ways of housing. So trying to associate one officer per X amount number of inmates is not an adequate and correct way to identify the staff that you need. The other thing is, once a jail opens, it's not like any other county building. It's 24/7, 365. It never closes. And then when staffing it, the same thing has to happen in that jail every day. It's not like if I've got somebody off in a certain area, possibly on patrol, that maybe warrants don't get served in that zone that day, or the next person somebody served. In the jail, it's not like that. The same things have to happen 7 days a week, every day, around the clock. And with that, it's a very important need to have what's called proper shift relief. And proper shift relief is not just somebody that's going to come in and give you a break to go for lunch, but actually to make sure that those posts that are identified as having to be manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that allows for that coverage. Shift relief deals with, you actually look at how many hours each employee is available to work in a year. And then out of looking at how many hours they're available to work, then how many hours do they have available for sick leave, vacation, holidays, and then mandated training. The state mandates a certain number of hours of training that every officer must have each year. You can't work and achieve that training at the same time. So in order to actually calculate the proper shift relief, you take all of those elements that they can be away from work and deduct that from the hours that they are available. It's actually a calculation that NIC recommends that you go by to determine that shift relief factor. In coming up with that, we got from a lot of the county personnel and stuff, all of those hours, all the sick leave, vacation, and all that stuff, and calculated that into that formula. Cabarrus County's shift relief factor, and you'll see in the document, I show a chart that shows hours post required to be covered, and it's broken down into an 8-hour post, 12-hour post, and a 24-hour post. Some posts in the jail only need to be covered 8 hours, and that's because that job responsibility that goes along with that post may just be a Monday through Friday post. It may be just activities that just happen, especially ones that are associated with the court. Only the court's open during that time. The 24-hour posts are things that are responsible for safety and security of the facility and the inmates 24 hours a day. And then the 12 hours are things that just like I said about the other two, that accommodate just a 12-hour shift. When we calculated the shift relief factor for Cabarrus County, it came up to 5.54 people per 24-hour post. What that means is that for every area of that jail that has to be manned 24 hours a day, in order to achieve that, you need to have 5.54 people hired to cover that. That's one person on each 12-hour shift. You've got 4 different squads that work. That gives you one person on each of them, and then 1.54 of a person to cover when they're away, when they're on sick leave, they're on vacation, they're getting training, to make sure that that post is manned 24 hours a day. The jail is unlike probably any other county function, with the exception of emergency management. EMS works on this same type of system. They have to be manned 24 hours a day because you never know when that call's coming. So you'll probably see something similar in shift relief when dealing with EMS. After coming up with and calculating it and it coming out to 5.54, in discussions with the sheriff's staff and going through it, actually agreed to reduce that factor some. Said, yeah, our people, we're able to minimize some of that. So where that was really beneficial in doing it, they changed it from 5.54 to 5.25 as we agreed upon, based on their workload and how they manage their personnel. Looking at that, you say, well, that doesn't sound like a whole lot. But when you're talking about 365 days a year with all the numerous posts, that pretty much saved you almost about 19 full-time positions just by doing that. So that was pretty critical in the impact of staffing this building. In doing a jail staffing analysis, there's so many mandates by state and federal government that you have to do. This has to be done and everything. So that's when determining these posts it came into play. What we did, we looked at it as staffing the entire facility, including the annex. Everything is one lump sum as one jail operations, because that's how it's going to be run. We did break it down into several different groups of classification. You've got an administrative class, a security class, and then a support services, and then intake and release as a separate. And you'll see as you look through, we gave some little bullet point job descriptions. Just like with the law enforcement side, a lot of people don't understand or recognize what duties has to go on in a sheriff's office. Well, it's even more complex in a jail. The biggest thing is that you see is classification. The law requires that each inmate be properly classified when they're assigned their housing unit. You can't just take someone that's charged with a violent felony and put them in the same cell block with child support or nonviolent crime, because then you're not providing for that inmate's safety, which that's what you're mandated, required by law. That's the kind of questions that you normally hear from the public. Why can't you just put them all in there together? Well, you can, but you probably going to end up needing to get some other type of insurance for the county, because you're going to end up writing a check down the road. So in looking at the staffing plan for Cabarrus County, we tried to minimize the liability to the county as much as possible. We also talked about earlier in the law enforcement side, the overtime. My background is in law enforcement and mainly in detention. for somebody to tell you that you're gonna be able to add enough staff that you're gonna do away with overtime, I don't buy it. There's always gonna be a need for overtime. You're gonna have the flu bug hit, and you're gonna have 40 officers out. You know, then how many people do you throw at it? Do you constantly keep throwing full-time staff to eliminate that? So there will be some need for overtime regardless of what happens. But what we tried to do was staff it in an efficient way to minimize your need for overtime. If you're paying time and a half for overtime on a regular, consistent basis, then you're throwing good money after bad. I mean, you're better off to staff it one time to eliminate that time and a half. You're saving, I mean, that's basic mathematics. But what we tried to do in this report is to give you some basic explanations and job descriptions. They're not detailed, but it should give you some idea of what has to happen in each area. The jail with the new housing tower is comprised of 3 floors in the new housing wing. On each floor, you've got 2 control rooms, 2 housing control rooms that oversee 96 beds. It's basically like having the annex, 2 annexes on each floor. So it's what it amounts to. We spent a lot of time observing how the annex ran, what the workload was there, because it's going to be the same workload in the new jail, and then the distance and how they respond to stuff. I remember when we did the transition piece on the annex, we did a little scenario case to where we took the staff in and said, how many of you think you're ready to open this today? And it was probably 98% of them said, we're ready today. Well, we took index cards and we assigned scenarios to where they played the role of inmates. This inmate picks a fight at 10 o'clock. This other inmate's trying to hang himself in the shower at 10:30. This one's got his attorney visiting, mealtime, every daily function that happens. After we went through about 4 hours of that, it was only 2% that said, I think we're ready. Well, we took that same type approach when looking at the staff needed to do this. We observed how the annex was run and how efficient they were able to operate with all the daily responsibilities that happen. You've got intake of every newly admitted inmate coming in. When Concord Police, Highway Patrol, Kannapolis, anybody that brings somebody that's housed in Concord Jail through intake, there's a series of activities that have to happen. It's not just, okay, here's Joe, we take Joe, put Joe in a cell and we're done. You have to inventory their personal property that they have. You have to log that. You have to search them. You have to run them through to make sure they don't have any other outstanding charges. You make sure that medically they're okay to be housed. So it's a little bit of more than just bringing somebody through the door and locking them up. And what we tried to do was give you an explanation of each one of those positions. In security, after you get through all of the different administrative positions, and when we listed it under administration, we have a captain's position. A jail is like its own little town. It's everything happens right there. Inmates make purchases just like you do. You know, they keep up, they have commissary that they do. You have money that you have to keep up there, there's property that you have to keep there. You have to feed them 3 times a day. You have medical, provide them medical. All these are mandates that you have to do. A lot of times when doing these, we get asked about why can't we put them in a tent? Why can't we do that? You can. What they don't tell you that there's 12 full-time attorneys offending all those lawsuits out there to deal with that. So that's what we tried to do by showing you in this report all the different responsibilities. Looking at the different posts that are identified as 24-hour posts, every chance we could to decrease a 24-hour post down to maybe where it was 2 24-hour post positions, to decrease it to 1 24-hour post and 1 12-hour post. At night, what happens? People are locked back, the inmates are locked back in a cell. It's not as much movement. You don't have as many attorneys coming. We did that. We made those adjustments. So you're not having too many people. The other big question I normally get is about the shift relief. Well, you tell us that we need 5.5 people or 5.25 people to man that. What happens when all 5 people show up for work? That's never gonna happen, because you're always got somebody on vacation, you've always got somebody out sick, you've always got somebody in training. There's 22 hours per employee of state mandated training that they have to have. Well, when they have to have it on time that they're not working. So when they're not working, somebody has to be. So that's why that proper shift relief is in there. In watching how the annexed operated and seeing how many people it took to actually run that efficiently, to still maintain safety and security in the facility, you pretty much had to have 2 floor officers. And the floor officers, basically, they handle all of the everyday needs, going with them for the other inmates when they're feeding meals to them, changing of the linens when that has to be done, which that's too is state mandated on how often that has to be done. So it's in a 12-hour shift, it's not a whole lot of time that officers have sitting back looking at whatever. If they're sitting back, they're watching security monitors to see. It's funny, I tell people all the time, when you lock people up and you put them in there, it's hard enough to get 96 church people to get along together, much less 96 people that are locked up in a jail.
They're not Presbyterians.
So you can imagine some of the stuff they have to do. So it's like adult daycare, you know. I tell my kids, when do you misbehave at school? You misbehave when the teacher leaves the room. Well, that's the same way with a jail inmate. When they see an officer not looking, that's when they're trying to tear that toilet up, or they're trying to break something that's going to cost the county money. Or they're going to do even worse. They're either going to try to harm themselves or harm another inmate, which comes back to liability on the county. So as you read through this and you see the different job descriptions for all the different posts, it's pretty self-explanatory, and I think you can get a good idea of what each position will do. In food service, I'll talk about one of the support service, the food service position. The state says that if you're going to use inmate labor, then you must have a certified detention officer supervising those inmates while they're in there. Well, if you've got to staff it, then why do it? Well, the benefit is when you use inmate labor, your cost per tray comes down quite a bit. And whoever handles finance for the county can probably attest to that by seeing your change in your cost per meal. You're probably more than double the cost of that manning that post by your savings over feeding meals. Because you feed 3 meals a day, 365, and it's 2,400 to 2,800 calories that's required by state law. And so having a person dedicated in that food service that supervises those inmates while they're working is a have to. You don't have any choice there. If you're gonna take advantage of using free inmate labor, then you've got to have somebody supervise it. Medical, as a medical officer in the support that we show, anytime your facility that you design, you actually have medical beds. So when an inmate has a medical condition that they need to be put in a medical bed, the state says that becomes what they call an infirmary. And anytime you have an inmate in it, it must be staffed. Well, if you've got to put an inmate in there at 2 o'clock in the morning and you don't staff it, then where does that person come from? Well, you're pulling them from another security post that's then leaving that position open, so you're vulnerable in that area. So by identifying a medical person, we added responsibilities to that post. So they're not just sitting there waiting on Junior to come to medical. They're also coordinating everything, and they're working with providing scheduling trips when they have to go outside the facility for medical care. If that medical care is so great that they have to go to an outside hospital, they coordinate that. So it's a lot to those positions. We put a court escort officer. The court escort officer is Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. That is when court is in session to move them from the jail to court and bring them back. The bailiffs are handling a large portion of that and will continue to. But by adding just that one position to do that, you're actually allowing for the sworn deputy working in the courtroom to remain in the courtroom as much as possible. And you're providing somebody that can escort that inmate back and forth to court. We see that as actually saving a little bit of money and actually providing into court security a little bit better. They also, things happen, an inmate goes to court and they may be giving time served for their sentence. Well, they've been in jail for 30 days, they just got a 45-day sentence, and it may say time served. Well, what actually the court order was, give them credit for the time they served in jail prior to being sentenced. Well, they get sentenced to 45 days, they got 30 days jail credit. You still got 15 days hanging out there. If you don't have somebody that actually heard that judgment, because the clerk may or whoever may write on their time served, that could be interpreted two different ways. It could be interpreted as we give them credit for the days they served, which was 30, or we release them because they get time served. So that's a critical element to make sure that that exchange of information from the court, that the actual court order is accurate. One, you don't want to release anybody prior to where the court actually ordered for them to be released, or you don't want to keep them longer if the actual intent was for them to release. So that's another thing that court escort officer can determine and get put back into their system, so make sure that all of that information is processed correctly. I'm not going to go through each one of these different positions because it's a lot of different descriptions. That's just some of the ones that we normally get a lot of questions about. You'll see on the actual last page, what I did is actually put together a chart that broke down every single position in the facility. Now, these are not all new positions. These are looking at what you need to run this whole facility. You've got right at 71 positions that you have now already. So those positions would be redesignated into this total 198 positions. So you're only looking at 176 or 77, I think, total, as opposed to 198, or no, 120, I'm sorry, 120, because you've already got that many. I show whether or not we identified the position as requiring shift relief or not, and that was the determining factor if it had to be manned 24 hours a day or 12 hours a day or 8 hours a day, if it had to be manned. And a lot of, you see, none of the administrative positions require shift relief, and even under security, we didn't require shift relief for the lieutenant or the sergeant's position. Those typically, the sergeant and lieutenant are never off at the same time. So you have a senior person in charge of that group at any time. That's not to say that won't happen. You have a lieutenant on vacation and a sergeant out sick, but then that's when one of the administrative or operations overall lieutenants will fill in. And then we broke it down into intake. You see that's got a intake sergeant. That's where you hear of, a lot of times they call them, this guy got out of jail. You see it in the newspaper, but it's an improper release. That's where somebody was released mistakenly. Either the paperwork wasn't correct or wouldn't interpret correctly, or they let the wrong one go. That's where it's an important thing to have a supervisor over that division, so they oversee all of the paperwork when it's coming in and make sure it's a consistent interpretation and those things are minimized. You've got an ICE sergeant that you already have, so that position just carries over. Receiving and search officers, we talked about when someone comes in, when they're under arrest and they're brought in, what all has to happen. That's searching them and receiving them from the agency. That also aids in getting your deputies back on the street quicker, so they don't have to stay with them through that whole process like they would normally. And the quicker they're back on the streets, the quicker they're patrolling, and the better they are protecting your citizens. And then the court escort we talked about, where we show booking officers, that's inputting all the information into the jail management system. Their charges, their amount of bond, all their property listings, all that stuff, their medical observations, everything that has to happen. And then the booking escort officer, because of where your intake is located and where the actual housing are, after they're admitted into the facility and then they have to be taken to the housing unit they're assigned to, they have to be escorted. So you need a dedicated person that actually goes get them, plus the reverse of that when they're being released. Somebody can go so you're not pulling somebody off of another post. I know I've kind of gone through this and I've talked pretty quickly, but that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I do want to thank members of the Sheriff's Office staff and a lot of the county personnel that helped give us the information that we needed to do this. It was a little different working with a group like we did, because they kept trying to reduce numbers, and that's not something I'm used to. I'm used to doing a staffing analysis, and they're going, we need more than that because we know we're only going to get 6, and you're asking for 8. We're only going to get 6. I didn't hear that. This was like, I think we can do it with less, and that was good to hear, because they're concerned about how efficient they operate. So I do want to thank the county staff and all their numerous meetings that we had working on this and trying to pull this together.
Any questions right now? Commissioner Minot?
Obviously, this is for the entire new facility manned full.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have any idea what portion of that facility will be manned when it opens?
Looking at the numbers that was done actually in the forecast at where you're at, your current population is kind of going up and back. You'll see once you go in, open the new facility, right now y'all are able to ship people to the Department of Corrections with lesser time than what the state requires, because you're overcrowded. And that cap is on your population. That cap is going to be released. The last time I think we checked, you had about 55 people that were in the Department of Corrections that, once that cap is taken away, are coming back here. So you can add 55 people to what your population is now. In the addition to that, normally when a new facility opens, you see anywhere from a 10 to 15% increase in admissions. And the reason being is because people have been so conditioned to the jail's overcrowded, it's going to take me forever to get them in there, or trying to help the sheriff out or whatever, that, they've got beds now. You build it, they will come kind of comes into play. You're going to see an increase. So you're probably going to, it wouldn't surprise me to see the day that you open it, probably about overall, counting the ones you come back from the cap, probably a 20% increase. I would not be surprised to see that at all, on top of what you're housing now.
Commissioner
I
Poole?
would presume that, like the other presentation, that this will have a
We'll talk
lot of
about it at the same
discussion
time.
during the budget process, and that we'll have some kind of a timeline based on how you think each of these different units will be kind of coming online, if you will. Because I wouldn't think that the entire place will be ready to open on day one, that there would be that much need, but let's hope not, at least. I would also, I presume that this report we just got, as we got here, as you know.
Yes, ma'am.
I glanced through it as much as I could, but obviously haven't read it as in-depth as the other one. But I would presume that this will be posted on our website also, so that the general public can look at it. As we all know, there's been a lot of discussion over the years about the detention center, and my neighborhood of the county is one that was quite interested in it. So I think this is some information that needs to be able to be available to the general population of citizens to look and see what it does take to staff the facility, and they can understand that. So, but they're very good reports. I've learned a lot reading both of them and trying to get through this one today. But there is a lot of really interesting information in there that we'll need some time to go over, and I'm sure Mrs. Dubois is going to spend a lot of time looking at it. So and the county manager. So, but thank you again.
Thank you, Commissioner Crook.
Yeah, just, I was curious, because, and I apologize for being a few minutes late, staffing stuff I was dealing with, but anyway, the 198 on the last page for total staff recommended, what, I mean, that's obviously the, you know, gross staff that's needed. What is that net increase? I mean, I don't see in here what we're at right now.
We currently have 71 dedicated to all of our services, so this is inclusive of that as well. And I want to say that, again, I don't even have this document. I've only got the one page, and I got it Thursday of last week. So, I mean, that's how far out of this I've been. But now I can say my chief deputy and my administrators in the jail have met and met and met. And they know how particular I am about, don't bring me a product that we got to keep shaving and shaving and shaving. You know, bring it, you know, have a lot of that done. And they have done a fantastic job. When, matter of fact, met with John Day just briefly last week and talked. And when I heard the number, I was like, there's no way. I mean, you start doing the math on the annex that we have, and I did that number, and then you try to multiply it. But when you sit down and you start going through this thing, and I worked in that jail for a number of years, and I've been over it for the last 9, there's just some things that, again, I go back to 9 years ago when we were looking at the functionality and how to build it. I made the comment way back then that we can pay now and save later. We can save now and pay later, because we were looking at the facility that we run now. That's a linear facility that is not near as labor intensive as this. But if you save money on brick and mortar, then it's more labor intensive, and that's where we're at today. And you start talking about, you know, having to put people in master control and have, you know, really the functionality. I can take you to the annex now and show you that all of these things that are being presented here are taking place in some form or fashion in that facility. But you know, again, when you go to 3 different floors, it's a whole lot different than having one pod of 96 people as associated to 96, 96, 96, 96, 96, 96. The other thing I want to plant a seed in your mind, because I haven't had a chance to digest it, is keep in mind the number of beds. When we built this facility, you remember at the very end, there was a number thrown out there that we got X amount of cells, and for every one of those cells, you can do the math, multiply them by 2 beds. But the reality of that is, and we did put 2 beds in every one of those, so one day if we ever get to full capacity, we'll have the ability to double bunk in every bed. But the reality is that there are a number of inmates. There's a certain percentage of all populations that have to be single-celled. So when you take that total number and you multiply it by that number, and I think it was 25 or 30% just being safe, then again, that reduces your number of beds on a particular floor. If you single cell all in one area, let's just say it's first floor, and there's 187 beds on that floor. Well, if you reduce that by 40, 45, because you're single celling a number of population, you're designating that as your disciplinary action, then you've just reduced that from 187 to 140 some. Well, we're seeing numbers of 300 plus today. So you got 140 there, then you go up to the next floor and you got 96 and 96. Well, one of those have to be dedicated to 48 females that are in jail. Well, one side is just about covered with females, so you could, you pretty much have to dedicate the other side. You can't wait till you get a couple that are spread over to the other side before you can dedicate the other side. So you have to dedicate almost 96 beds to female population to staff it that way. So now you're giving up a couple more 30, 40 beds waiting on that female growth. So when you start making those numbers out, you almost get down to the point where, yeah, you can cut the lights out upstairs, maybe on a pod or 2, but you also take a chance of filling up to that point pretty quick, and then you got to snap 18 to 40 people into place and get them trained and get them up to speed in a quick manner. So again, I haven't digested all those numbers, but just take a look at that and think about those numbers as you proceed through.
Anything else? Thank you very much. Why don't we take about a 10-minute recess and come back at 5 minutes after 5. Okay, the next matter we have is G3, which is the voluntary mitigation payment adjustment for 2010. And at this time, I call on Mrs. Morris to present to us and let us know what's going on.
What you have in front of you should have 3 different documents. One is the memo that explains that time of year that we need to have in order to keep the voluntary mitigation payment amount the same as what it was the prior year. This year, based on the Marshall and Swift valuation service, the payment is actually scheduled to decrease if the board chooses to stay at the same amount. You'll see in the last table 3, the original amount from the Tischler Bay study was $12,425, and the amount for the voluntary mitigation payment that is proposed is actually $12,598. So you'll see that that did go down from last year. It was $14,000. And then based on the current policy, if the board decided to stay at that 60.572%, which is the current adopted policy, the amount will be $7,631 for single family. So you can see the progression. Initially, the contribution was 50%, then it went up to 65%, and then last year it was reduced to the 60.57%. So that's what you have on this table. You also should have a copy of the resolution, and staff would need some direction as far as that resolution, as far as what percentage the commissioners would like to use for the adjustment. So the numbers that you have in table 3 are based on historically percentages that the Board of Commissioners have used as the policy, but the actual amount for the voluntary mitigation payment is what is reflected in table 3, where it says amount for VMP based on index adjustment to October of 2009. So that would be 100% based on the adjustment from the original 100% in the Tischler study.
That's what you're talking about, right? In that column?
That's correct. If we were to collect 100% of that amount, that's what it would be. And then to your right are the different amounts based on percentages that have been used in the past. And of course, if the board wanted to, that amount, could be changed to reflect a different percentage.
Any questions for Mrs. Morris right now? If we were to set a policy of any percent, doesn't matter what the percentage is it something that can be revisited throughout the year?
I believe that it can, and I'll let our attorney address that.
I mean, we don't want to change it from month to month, but if we set it at 60% or 60.572% later this month, and at the retreat we talk about these issues and we have discussions and decide that it should go a little bit lower, it's not going to, or go higher, or change in any way. It doesn't affect that should not affect.
That's correct. Actually, the ordinance specifies that you are required to do it in January of each year, but it does not prohibit you from doing it more often.
Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, I think that we should, whatever we decide, whatever the decision is made, that it doesn't change the discussion that we should have at our retreat. I think at our retreat, we should have a discussion about, when it should be paid, if it should be changed, because I know that we've done it on a few instances, and Commissioner Poole has referenced, and correctly, that if that's going to be a policy shift of this board, we need to, let's make it in black and white. If it's going to be anything, whatever those changes are, that's what I think we need to talk about, is the APFO, how it's applied, in what circumstances. I really think, and I will present at our retreat, an idea that there needs to be a committee, and the committee needs to be of different people from this commission, from this board, from staff, from the building community, from the CCB, AI, that organization, so that we can all have a better understanding about what is the true issue, not only with APFO, but with building, the development industry at this point in time going forward, because it's certainly different than what it has been, and I think it's gonna be different, it's gonna be completely different in the future. We heard from Mr. Niblock that the type of building that we saw in the 80s is not gonna be, he doesn't believe it's gonna be in the future. Well, what does that mean to us? How do we plan for that? So that's where I think the discussion needs to go at our retreat. And I think that's where the committee needs to be talked about, is tackling some of these issues and having a specific charge and coming back to us. But as it I mean, if there's no questions, I'd say we place this under the consent agenda for approval at the 60.572%, which we've done in the past.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mrs. Morris. Next matter we have is G4, is a request approval to use 911, and Mr. Gilliland, Lieutenant Gilliland, excuse me. And Mr. Shanley.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. I'm going to actually cover most of, because we're going to talk about technology a little bit today. We're going to ask the board to allow us to expand the use of the 911 funds to create a replace the equipment at the Concord and Kannapolis PSAPs. Those are their 911 centers, adding 6 positions, or replacing 6 positions at Concord and 5 positions at Kannapolis. The importance of this would be allow us to, our current 911 center, to allow those positions to be backups. I'm going to go through a little bit of what we've been through in the last year. I've laid this out in a memorandum in a kind of a 5-phase process. We've been through the first 3 phases. The first phase was to replace the 911 equipment at the new 911 center when we moved in to the administration building last year. The second phase was to add a second redundant system at the DSS facility where our redundant data center is. And then the third phase was to tie those 2 systems together. We've been able to tie those 2 systems together and to basically have a redundant 911 system. If the servers fail at our facility across the street, they're able to utilize the servers at the other location. With phases 4 and 5, those additional 11 positions would run off of those 2 servers. We would not be expanding and replacing servers at those other PSAPs. They would basically become a geographically dispersed PSAP at that point. So they would all run the 10 positions at the Cabarrus County PSAP, the 6 at Concord, the 5 in Kannapolis, and the 2 positions that we have dormant at the DSS site would all run off of those main servers.
Can you stop right there for a second?
Sure, absolutely.
What is a PSAP?
I apologize. That would be.
It's a public safety answering point for 911.
What does that mean?
It's a 911 center.
Okay.
Hey, I use an acronym that wasn't technology based. Sorry. That was, but yeah, so what we're looking for the board to do is authorize us to utilize those funds in the 911 fund to fund those positions at Concord and Kannapolis.
When you say those positions, are those employed positions?
No,
or
they're
the PSAPs, the 911 backup or rollover?
The technology,
Okay.
the positions as defined as a computer
Okay.
and basically an electronic telephone.
Okay. Does this expand or strengthen our system? I know it strengthens it as in backup, but as the county grows, is it going to be viewed as helping in that regards, or are we going to be able to serve everything here, and this is in case something fails or something goes down?
Could be both. I think
Okay.
the primary reason is for the actual backup, having common equipment between us and the cities. If need be, if we had to bug out of our center for whatever reason and move to those particular 911 centers, we all have common equipment to use with each other. That way, makes it a little easier for the telecommunicator, if you will,
Okay.
to look at that equipment.
So it's basically we can move our staff to a Concord or Kannapolis and be up and running in hours as opposed to days.
That is correct, yes.
And also running on that common equipment, you know, you think of a disaster of, well, how often is your entire building gonna shut down? And it's not, but for those rollover activities, when there's a higher call volume in a specific portion of the county, each of these other PSAP locations will be able to be backups for each other. So the citizens of the county will be much better served in this type of scenario versus the 3 PSAPs acting independently.
What assurances do we need, as a county, do we need to do to provide your office or Mrs. Brandon's office with accessibility to this hardware or these positions? And if we buy the equipment, but we don't have access to it, I want to make certain that we're protected there.
As far as,
technology-wise.
because we've located it at a facility that we do not own.
Correct.
Believe Lieutenant Gilliland's working on a backup plan, SOPs with those.
In agreements with those
Okay.
2 municipalities to come up with ways to access that equipment and submit a backup plan in writing.
Okay. Now, from a law enforcement aspect, we will now be on other law enforcement agencies' turf. How do we protect the sheriff's department to be able to go on there if we need to go on there in case our facility here gets shut down? I mean, I know you have a good working relationship today, but what about 6 months from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? How are we protected from a law enforcement aspect that we don't shut our services because feathers get ruffled?
We've talked about that with Concord or Kannapolis yesterday. We'd have to submit something in writing documentation that if someone was wanted out of the system and go on their own, and give them a certain time frame to do so.
Okay.
In writing.
But our intention is that this would be equipment that would belong to the county.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
And it certainly would benefit everybody throughout the county. There's no benefit to go out on their own and purchase independent equipment. It's not going to provide a better service than what we will be able to provide with this equipment.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions? We have a motion to place this under consent agenda. We have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you all very much.
I do have one more question.
Sure.
Just to make sure. So the request is for us to use the money to go ahead and do this expansion. Now it's scrolling back up. Is this being done, is it conditional on getting these agreements with the 2 municipalities? So is that how, in 2 weeks when we do the motion, is that how it will be written, that we would purchase or go into this lease, conditional on being able to answer all your questions, right? Okay, I just want to make sure that was.
Right, we would anticipate an interlocal agreement that would be drafted, and then again, coming back to the board for approval.
Okay,
Yeah,
and
right.
this is on consent?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll make sure that the motion that's on consent is conditional upon those interlocal agreements, okay.
Yeah, and also, in order for, what we're asking first is to expand the system, for the board to give staff the authority to expend those 911 funds, and then with permission from the board, then we'll have to go to the state as well with a plan for them to allow us to use since we're the primary PSAP, we get the funds. So we have to ask their permission to approve our plan to expend those funds on the cities as well, so.
Thank you. Next we have is G5, which is the request to increase rabies vaccination for dogs and cats. That's found on page 232. Mr. Day. And for the board's understanding, I got an email from somebody about this, and I asked John about it and asked Commissioner Kruth, since he's the board liaison to the Animal Advisory Committee, Board and Committee.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway.
Right, and this was in response to a request from a veterinary office to increase the fee for rabies vaccinations at county-sponsored events. So this is not just when you walk into the office. These are only at the drive-through, basically, events that are held. And I don't recall what the number of years was that it has been since it was increased, but it has been quite some time. We simply just placed this on the agenda at the request of that veterinary office, and I thought Commissioner Kruth, because of all his involvement in this sort of thing, would have some comments on it.
Commissioner Kruth?
Yeah, and we've not met. We're in the process of trying to get together a meeting, because there was also another whole group of things that, besides this, that were changes to animal control legislation that were including some additional requirements on the animal control department at the sheriff's office that is in there. And what the group, I think there's some synergies that can come forth from that as well as from this. So when they meet, I don't know whether they're probably not going to be able to meet before our meeting. So I don't know whether we want to table this till February and give them time to meet to talk about those changes and talk about this as well, to come back with a recommendation.
I was thinking that it would be good to get a recommendation from the Animal Preservation Advisory Committee as to whether we should adopt anything and what should the price be, because although the administration, or there's an amount not to exceed $10, however, that doesn't cover the administration costs, and doing both of them together may be a little bit greater than $10. I mean, it's $12 or $13, but I believe. But if I was thinking it would be good for the Animal Preservation Advisory Committee to look at it and give us a recommendation of what their thoughts are, is my thought.
Yeah, one of the challenges you have is the ones that are the responsible pet owners are the ones that they'll have no problem paying, and but the ones you're trying to reach through the rabies clinic, because most of them take their pets to their own vet to have the rabies done. And the ones you're targeting with the rabies clinic and the ones you're targeting with spay neuter clinics are the ones that are, that's where 80% of your problem comes from in regards to, rabies, as far as excessive dogs and cats and overpopulation of dogs and cats in the community. And so time you put something on there that gives them less incentive to come, what do you that's one of the things you got to look at, I think, on this as well. But that's something I want to look at, and look at some other ways to do some other things as well. So we should be able to meet in time for this to be put on the February agenda, if we want to do that.
February work agenda or February?
Just bring it, just put it straight on the
Okay, I believe that will be February the 15th.
Agenda.
Is that, I believe it's February the 15th.
Okay, I think we can probably.
We have a motion to place this under the February the 15th new business agenda. We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. The next matter we have is G6, which is the BFI fuel surcharge. That's found on page 238.
You may recall from the last franchise agreement that there was a flat fee, or you agreed to a flat fee of 7.5% added to the subscription price to cover a fuel recovery fee, or to serve as a fuel recovery fee. That was 7.5% compared, or based on the original franchise amount from, I'm struggling with the date, maybe 2000 or something like that, when the franchise was first approved. So that was a flat fee. We had some comment from the public about whether it made more sense to have an adjustable fee. So we met with the folks from Allied BFI, and there's a chart in here showing the, let's see what page, this is on page 243, showing the lower Atlantic fuel prices, which is put out by the federal government. And so if you go down this chart then and look at what diesel prices are right now, which is between $2.80 and $2.90, and you see that the fuel adjustment fee would be 6%. So if we went to a quarterly adjustment and we use the prices that are out there right now, then it would actually be less than what our flat fee of 7.5% is. Of course, there are other times when there's a fluctuation and it would be considerably more. So I don't know that I really have a recommendation as to what you might want to do. BFI Allied is willing to go to a quarterly adjustment if you'd prefer that, and it's really just a gamble. You just sometimes
So we
it's
get to
lower,
play, we get to
sometimes
play the
it's better.
commodity, kind of like playing the commodity market, no?
That's right. So, you know, for a period of time, we were actually better off, you know, than what the prices are right now. I mean, after they shot up back in 2008 and early 2009, we were doing very well compared to what the actual number would have been. But now, of course, that's not the case. So it's probably unlikely that I think that diesel prices are going to go much lower than they've been over the past 6 months. I don't think anybody would expect them to turn around back in that direction unless we have another catastrophe in the stock market.
I do know, I heard the radio yesterday that one of the concerns is that because around the entire northern hemisphere this year, it appears like that everywhere from, you know, everywhere, Europe, Russia, China, you know, the U.S. obviously, and everywhere are having record cold winters. And they're already talking about is that going to do to the price of crude oil when, you know, springtime gets here because of, you know, this increased fuel costs this winter. I don't know whether it's a good idea to even go on this because we could see
winter
go
might
back.
particularly be a bad time to
Yeah.
do this. Now, and Allied BFI said they would do this anytime the board would want to. So maybe it would be better to consider this in the summer than in the winter if you wish to consider it at all.
Yeah, I think that it concerns me on two fronts is we are all very cognizant of the fact it's taxpayers' money, and it's their own money because we're allowing something to take place. And to create an atmosphere that could be volatile, you know, it concerns me greatly. Because if I look at the bill one month and it's X dollars, and then I look at it the next month, it's X plus $25, you know, I'm going, wait a second. So I'm not saying we don't look at it later, but I would be reluctant to change it off of a set amount. And in good times, it's good, and in bad times, we're made a great decision when the gas prices are way up, and we made a poor decision when they're way down. So, but I think that to be constant and have a good rate that way, it's a safer and it's a more responsible decision. But I think we wait until maybe this summer and look at it again. Any contrary
I agree.
views?
I like the idea as far as if I were paying the bill, I'd like to know that I could budget and have an idea what my budget's gonna be. I sure would not like that 11% or whatever it was. It hasn't been that long ago that price of fuel was up there, so.
Yeah.
That would be scary if every quarter you knew that it could fluctuate that much since, based on, I don't think anybody's salary, my salary hasn't gone up anytime recently, so I can't imagine, you know, too many salaries are really getting increases at this point in time. But I agree with you, I don't mind looking at it come summer, but having one in Boone right now, it's definitely cold. This is not a winter. My daughter's getting ready to go back up this weekend, and she is not happy. We would like for UNC Charlotte to add a nutrition major so she can stay home, because she's not happy about going back up there, but.
I gotta go up there in the next couple of days, so.
Well, you know that when the ski slopes have to close because it's too cold,
And then there's something wrong.
there's something wrong.
Yeah.
Because my son has not been able to work much. He goes out for 2 hours and they do 20-minute shifts because they get frozen eyelashes and stuff like that. So it's too cold when you can't work on the slopes. That's pretty bad.
Without any other comment, why don't we revisit this, middle of July. That'll be after we adopt the new budget or potentially adopt the new budget. Good, or we better adopt the budget by June 30th, so say July. I believe that covers everything that we're supposed to review today and talk about today. Am I missing anything, Mrs. Honeycutt? With that, do we have a motion to adjourn? Oh, I'm sorry. I did make a note. One thing that I'm sorry that I did not get back to the commissioners, and I will send something out to everybody, but I think that we need to make a consideration about possibly adopting a resolution to support more of the small businesses. With the closing of Philip Morris, I think now is the time that we need to do everything we can to support small and medium-sized businesses. And I know I keep hearing on the radio, and I know everybody else is, about the bailout money for banks, but not credit cards. In that line of thought, I think that we need to look at adopting a resolution for small business as well as the car industry. I think we know of some things going on, and I think it would certainly help if there was a show of support from the community for the car industry, and I would certainly say specifically minus automotive industry or automotive business. I will get a resolution together and pass it out, or email it to everybody, and certainly copy it to Mrs. Honeycutt, but I'd like for us to consider it at our meeting at the end of the month. Yes?
I sent you, I think, all an email and put hard copies in your box on April being Organ Donor Month, and a request that we do a resolution and we fly that flag for the month of April. So I'd like to make sure everybody looks at that. I don't know timing-wise, if maybe February is the time to try to get that on the agenda. I don't know what you were thinking about that. We didn't have a great conversation. I mean, we talked a little bit about it,
Yeah.
but not in depth.
I think the idea was to have it fly in April.
Yes.
I'm not aware of any other requests in regards to flying any flags or the.
Don't think we've ever had a request to fly any flags.
This is a crazy question, but I'm certain we have a flagpole that can be flown on or below.
There are 3, so it could go on certainly
below.
the one with the county flag.
Okay.
And I need to verify, because what I was told is that they would provide the flag for us to fly. But, it's an important service. You and I both have served with somebody who's had numerous organ transplants, and I think the idea behind it is that it's an awareness factor for the county for us to do that and to support that cause. And as I told you guys in the email, it is a family member of mine that is requesting it. So I want to make sure I disclose that to everybody, my niece. And so whenever you think it would be appropriate to put it on the agenda, I'd like just to ask that we place that on the agenda.
Why don't we put it on the
February or March, sometime in advance of April, so
yeah, let's do it for the
they
March.
need a little lead time to make sure they can
Let's do it for the
get
March
so.
agenda, or March regular session, which would be March 15th.
Okay.
And we can adopt it then for April.
Okay. Are we gonna discuss I know we have this on there to talk about the commissioner appointments. Are we gonna discuss that in 2 weeks, or how are we gonna look at that? Any
We can
changes?
discuss that in 2 weeks. I'd like for everybody to look over who your liaison with, and contact me about, if your time commitment needs to change to another committee or another liaison, you'll contact me. We'll see about getting those changed. Commissioner Pruitt.
Yeah, just one last thing is and I'm just passing this along since I'm, see those folks regular basis, but a question I asked today, if anybody from staff or board is going to Washington for legislative conference in March.
For NACO?
Yeah,
I will not be going.
okay, I'm just passing on the message. I kind of answered for everybody. I kind of assumed that no one was, I told them that probably no one was going, so it's just too rough a year
Yeah.
to do that.
Okay. Anything else? We have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We are adjourned.